Welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. Wizards of the Coast did not do precons for the Avatar set, so I have prepared 4 different precons for you guys. I built Aang 5-color allies, I built Toph land/artifact aristocrats, I built Bumi just flat out lands beatdown, and then I built Ozai as a power matters big mana kind of commander, and all of these are going to be under $80, kind of in the precon price range. Now, full disclosure, this video did take a little bit longer than my normal uploads, and I did put a lot more work into it. So if you guys could like, comment, subscribe, share this video, I would really appreciate it, and it would show that you guys want me to do this more often in the future. I wanted to give my budget players some love, so this is that video, giving you budget guys some love, and hopefully it'll give you some ideas whenever you go out and try to build these commanders as well. With that being said, click on that whatnot link, claim your free $15, get 10% off all of your Tolarian library proxies whenever you use code DT4D, and then let's get right into it. I'm now sponsored with Baron of Dice. This means you guys can get 5% off whenever you guys use the code DT4D or click the link in the description down below. I'm a huge fan of the awesome art on their deck boxes and just the way they look in general, and you can pair up those awesome deck boxes with high quality playmats that match those deck boxes. Thank you, Baron of Dice, for sponsoring this channel. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a rundown of every single deck. Now, we're not going to go over a very in-depth guide on how to play these decks like I normally do in my deck techs, but what I am going to do is give you a description of the deck, how you can expect it to play, what are some of the cards you need to look for whenever you're trying to end out the game, and how are these decks going to win, and how can you assemble their value engines, because I think those are the most important things. You need to cast your commander, assemble your value engine, and then look for your win cons. So those are going to be the main 3 points we're going to cover whenever we're talking about these precons. Let's start it off with Avatar Aang. This is a 5-color ally precon. He's red, green, white, and blue, and then his backside does have 5-color pips, so he is 5-color. He has flying, firebending too, and whenever you waterbend, earthbend, firebend, airbend, you get to draw a card, and then if you've done all 4 this turn, you get to transform him. When you transform him, he has flying, and spells you cast cost Wooburg less. That's going to reduce all of the spells by 5 mana, 5 colored mana. So as long as they only have 1 pip in their cost, basically your entire library is free and you can just keep casting. So that's where the card advantage is going to need to come into play for flipping this guy. And then at the beginning of each upkeep, you can transform him. You get to draw 4 cards, put 4 counters on him, and then gain 4 life, deal 4 damage to every opponent. 4/4/4, right? Now, this is just a little bit of a value play. You should be able to win most of the times whenever you flip this guy. And then his front side is also very useful because that's the card advantage we're going to be utilizing to find our key pieces. So the goal with this guy, get him on the battlefield as soon as possible, get your benders on the battlefield, start bending as much as possible, and then utilize your ally payoffs to generate a massive board state. And finally, you're just gonna flat kill them with combat damage. Some of the key cards are Toph, Hard-Headed Teacher. She allows you to earthbend whenever you cast a spell, which with Aang on the battlefield says draw a card whenever you cast a spell, so that's kind of why we love her on the battlefield. We have Iroh. Iroh is amazing in this deck. He's 4 CMC, 2 generic, 2 red, has haste, mentor 1, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, each creature you control with a counter on it gains firebending 2. Now there's a lot of ways to give a 1/1 counter to your entire board state in this deck because we're running allies, and allies are able to put a 1/1 counter on each creature that's an ally, right? So now you attack with all of your allies. All of your allies have firebending, so you're essentially going to draw a card for every single attacking creature, which can give you a ton of value, and then on top of that, they also have firebending. So whenever you pair it with a huge mana sink like Katara, which has waterbending, so now you can shove all of your firebending mana into Katara's waterbending to make your board massive. You can kind of see where you can start killing opponents fairly easily. Some other cards of note are Haru. Haru allows you to earthbend whenever an ally enters the battlefield, so this is essentially your Kindred Discovery on a creature. Ally enters the battlefield, you earthbend, you draw a card with Aang. We're also on Kindred Discovery, you just get a ton of card advantage. You're attacking, you get to draw a ton of cards. Whenever an ally enters, you get to draw a ton of cards. Avatar's Wrath is another solid way you can end out the game. This says choose up to 1 target creature, then airbend all other creatures, even your opponents. So now everything's going to get exiled. You're going to get card advantage off of Aang if he's flipped over, and if he's not, and if he's on the other side, everything you cast from exile, those airbended cards, are free to cast, and that's going to be where we kind of just catapult ourselves ahead of our opponents here. Even if we have a haste enabler, we can wait a full turn. Maybe we have Teamer Battle Carrier on the battlefield that's going to reduce all of our spells by at least 2, because that's 4 power, Aang's 4 power, so all of our creatures are essentially free whenever we cast them from their airbended state. And that's going to allow us, as long as we have haste, to basically throw our entire board onto the battlefield where our opponents don't have a board, and then we are easily able to attack into an open board state. Absolutely broken. This gives me like Teferi's protection with extra steps, but it's still a very good card. I did also want to mention Song of Creation. This is your Storm's turn. This is when you go for it. This is a 4 CMC enchantment that's 1 generic, 1 green, 1 blue, and 1 red. It says you may play an additional land on each of your turns, and whenever you cast a spell, you get to draw 2 cards. At the beginning of your next end step, discard your hand. But what you do is you flip Aang, cast this for free, and now every time you're casting a spell, you're getting to draw 2. So hopefully you're just constantly casting your entire library, and while you're doing that, you're looking for an extra combat step to kind of end out the game, and then you can use your shared animosity effects that say whenever a creature you control attacks, each creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each attacking creature that shares a creature type with it. You know, you have Katara that water bends and buffs your entire board state by X. Moving on to Bumi. This is a 5 CMC legendary creature, 3 generic, 1 red, 1 green, and he says whenever Bumi enters the battlefield, you earthbend 4, and then whenever Bumi deals combat damage to a player, untap all lands you control, untap them, and then you get an additional combat step where only those lands can attack. I love this because it's like Sword of Feast and Famine in the command zone, and then additionally, you're going to get the ability to attack with your animated lands. So you can kind of very quickly deal a lot of damage with this deck, and I do want to stress this is not a landfall strategy, this is a land animation strategy. We are trying to animate all of our lands, turn them into creatures, and then kill our opponents with said animated lands. So it's just a very, very unique way that we can build land matters decks that isn't just landfall, and that's just really refreshing for me. So I wanted to give you guys that are playing on a budget a chance to, you know, utilize these new land strategies. One of the best cards in the deck is Liege of the Tangle. Yes, it's 8 CMC, but even with Bumi's ability, you can tap your lands, cast Liege of the Tangle. Hopefully it has haste. You're able to attack, deal combat damage. You animate all of your lands, turning them into 8/8 creatures, and then Bumi's going to attack them. You instantly go into the next combat step, and when you do that, you are able to attack your opponents with a massive board state of 8/8 lands. Liege of the Tangle, probably one of the best cards in the deck, and honestly, it is just one of those underrated cards that gets broken by this commander. We're also on Kozilek the Broken Reality. Shout out to Only Lands for showing me this guy. He's 9 CMC, and when you cast a spell, up to 2 target players each manifest 2 cards from their hands. For each card manifested this way, you get to draw a card. So he's card advantage, and then he says, other colorless creatures you control get +3/+2, which lands are colorless. So all of your lands that are getting counters put on them are now just 3/2s at the base, and then the counters is making them even stronger. And he's also just forcing your opponents to discard lands, which is pretty disgusting. We're also trying to give our lands either vigilance or untap our lands during the combat step. So we have red that gives them vigilance and trample, and also we have Raga Draga that's going to untap them whenever a creature with a mana ability attacks, which lands are mana abilities. I will say Raga Draga also does give each creature you control with a mana ability +2/+2, so you can kind of see the theme of where we're trying to buff our lands and also untap them, so we're able to tap them for mana, cast spells, but still utilize them in the combat step, which is the tricky part of this deck. You don't want your lands to not be able to cast spells, but you also don't want to not be able to attack with them during the first combat step. So we're trying to get through that with vigilance, and this does it very, very well. Another thing this focuses on is combat triggers, because regardless of us not being able to attack with our creatures during the second combat step, we still do go to another combat phase. This means cards like Kamal that say at the beginning of combat on your turn, creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample will trigger twice. So now your lands are going to get +6 for that additional combat step. Kamal also can pay 2 to animate lands and give them vigilance and indestructible, so it also synergizes a ton with the deck from that aspect. He's just going to do kind of everything we want to do. We're also on a natural growth. A natural growth allows you to double the power of each creature during the combat step. So again, that triggers twice, once from our normal one, again on the double combat from Bumi, and then we are just doubling the power of our lands twice. So even if you have a 4/4, which Bumi generates, it's now an 8/8, and then on that other combat step, it's going to be a 16/16. This gets disgusting very quickly and can deal enough damage to easily take out a couple opponents. The card advantage is also just super efficient here. Bitter Work is a 3 CMC enchantment that I think went a little bit under the radar. It says whenever you attack a player with one or more creatures with power 4 or greater, you get to draw a card. So essentially, if we attack each player with a 4/4 creature, we get to draw 3 cards. And then if we do that again on our second combat step, we get to draw another 3 cards. So this can essentially represent 6 cards a combat step, which is just massive for card advantage. I did also put Terra Symbiosis in the deck, a little bit more expensive, but it says whenever you put one or more counters on a creature you control, you may draw that many cards. Do this only once each turn. So for Earthbending 4, that's going to put 4 counters on a creature, and we're going to get to draw 4 cards off of that. And there's a lot of consistent ways to Earthbend 4 in this deck, so the card advantage this card provides is insane. Bumi's pretty simple though. Going on to our next one, we have Toph, the first Metal Bender. She's 4 CMC, 1 generic, 1 red, 1 green, 1 white, and the non-token artifacts you control are lands in addition to their other types. Additionally, at the beginning of your end step, you get to Earthbend 2. Now, she doesn't make it to where those lands can tap for mana upright, because I think that would be a little bit too broken. So the first thing we're going to have to do with this deck is jump through the hoop of making our lands tap for mana. So we have Prismatic Omen that says lands you control are every basic land type in addition to their other types, so now they can tap for mana. We also have Chromatic Lanterns that say lands you control have add 1 mana of any color, and there's a couple other cards in the deck that do this very similar thing. The majority of the deck is going to look very, very weird. Especially to a newer player, this is going to look like it does almost nothing, but whenever you pair it with Toph and whenever I explain how this deck works, you're going to see that this deck is incredibly efficient and does some really busted things whenever it starts churning. We are running a lot of artifacts that are 1 CMC and they just enter the battlefield, and then they have a sack trigger of some sort that allows you to draw a card and gives you some sort of value. A perfect example is Chromatic Star. Chromatic Star is a 1 CMC artifact that says we can pay 1, tap it, sacrifice Chromatic Star to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, and then it says whenever Chromatic Star is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you get to draw a card. So essentially, we're on a ton of very cheap artifacts that enter the battlefield, generate mana whenever we sacrifice them, and also draw us a card whenever we sacrifice them. And the entire goal of this deck is to not only net even, but kind of just gain mana whenever we're sacrificing these artifact cards. That way we can kind of rifle through our deck, and while we're rifling through our deck, not only are we getting increasingly more landfall triggers, we're also getting increasingly more artifact / landfall sacrifice triggers. So it's kind of a deck that tries to get as many triggers as possible per turn. Artifact Storm, but it's a land Artifact Storm deck. Kind of crazy, but also once you get the hang of this deck, it does some really absurd things, and it's going to benefit the player that really just sits down and learns it. Let's line up some of the really broken cards. We have Tireless Provisioner and Lotus Cobra. These net you mana whenever a land enters the battlefield, and remember, the majority of our artifacts are 1 CMC, so you cast a 1 CMC artifact, you net 1 mana off of it, it's like it's essentially free. And then Tireless Provisioner is a little bit better because it gives you a treasure token, and then you can sacrifice that treasure token to get even more value off of our artifact sacrifice triggers. Weapons Manufacturing is one of my favorite cards in this deck. Whenever a non-token artifact you control enters, create a colorless artifact token named Munitions. When this token leaves the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target. There's a lot of ways to sacrifice artifacts in this deck, so now we're sacrificing those artifacts and we get to deal 2 damage at anything. And remember, we're casting a ton of these 1 CMC artifacts, so we're going to get a ton of munitions. Sacrifice those munitions, we can ping off our opponent's important creatures, or we can just start pinging their face for some lethal damage. Blossoming Tortoise is actually kind of insane. Remember, a lot of these artifacts have like pay 1, sacrifice it, and then you get an effect, which is usually adding mana or drawing a card, and he's going to reduce all activated abilities of our lands by 1. So now essentially all of our activated abilities are free from our artifacts, and now they even cost less to do the thing. We're netting mana whenever they enter the battlefield, we're netting mana whenever we sacrifice them, and we can do this all for almost free. Again, this deck does some really cool things when it pops off. Jared's Hourglass, also really cool in the context of we're sacrificing a ton of artifacts. This is a 1 CMC legendary artifact that has flash, and if a player would begin an extra turn, that player skips that extra turn. For 4 mana, we can exile Jared's Hourglass Pendant, return to the battlefield tapped all artifacts, creatures, enchantments, and land cards from your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn, but you have to exile it, right? Well, Earthbending gets away from that. So you want to Earthbend Garrett's Hourglass. Now you can sacrifice the massive amounts of all these artifacts. And then after you do that, you're able to exile Garrett's Hourglass and bring all of them back ready to do again next turn. Just very broken things. And you can even do it that turn as well. I mean, a lot of these do have a tap ability, so the fact that they enter tapped is lame. But if you really wanted to buff this deck up, you could put in like an Amulet of Vigor or something like that that causes your lands to enter untapped. And that would probably take this deck to the next level. But a lot of those effects are pretty expensive, so I didn't include any of them in the precon, obviously. But again, if you wanted to take it to the next level, that is where I would go. Depth Shaker Titan is another one of my favorite cards in this deck. It's 7 CMC, it's an artifact creature robot, and it says when this creature enters, any number of target non-creature artifacts you control become 3/3 artifact creatures, sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. And then it says each artifact you control has melee, trample, and haste. Melee means they get +3 as long as we're attacking all three of our opponents, and you already know what trample and haste are. So now we take our massive board state of useless artifact eggs that just sacrifice themselves for mana, and now they're just straight up creatures. And now this does force you to sacrifice them, but remember, if we have Garrett's Hourglass on the battlefield, that's just null and void, and they're just instantly going to come back anyway. So again, there's a lot of weird stuff we can do in this deck to just not have to deal with downsides of cards, and that's where her power lies. Last but not least, we have Ozai the Phoenix King. This is a 6 CMC commander, 2 generic, 2 red, and 2 black. Has trample, firebending, 4, and haste, and if you would lose unspent mana, that mana becomes red instead. Additionally, Ozai has flying and indestructible as long as you have 6 or more unspent mana, and then it's a 7/7. So a 7/7 with flying and indestructible and trample and haste. He does a lot. I know he's a lot of mana, but the fact that he enters the battlefield, you attack with him, you firebend 4, and then hopefully you have at least 2 more mana to get him to that 6, he can kind of protect himself. And I would wait. It's worth waiting to cast him whenever you have 2 additional mana. That way you can just protect him that turn, because you would not want to cast this very expensive commander straight into a removal spell. Anyway, this guy's extremely powerful, and we went with like a power matters strategy because that does just synergize with the other version of him. We have Fire Lord Ozai in the deck as well. It's a 4 CMC legendary creature, human noble, and it says whenever Fire Lord Ozai attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, add an amount of red mana equal to the sacrificed creature's power until end of combat. You don't lose that mana, but that doesn't matter because our commander's Ozai, so we just flat out don't lose that mana ever, which is where this is going to be really powerful. And then it has another ability. We can pay 6 to exile the top card of each opponent's library. Until the end of turn, you may play one of those cards without spending its mana. So it's a nice mana sink, and it generates a ton of mana, plus we're never losing that mana anyway because of our commander. It just synergizes a lot with the commander. Another thing that's just really cool in this deck, and maybe not okay, is I put bulk up in there. This is a card that says double card target creature's power until end of turn, and it also has flashback for 6. So if we cast this for 2, double Ozai's power, he'll have 14. And then we go ahead and flash it back. He's going to have a total of 28 power, and you could just one-shot somebody with bulk up as long as you have 8 mana floating around, which this is that deck that can just have 8 mana floating around. And then again, we are on some additional combat steps because additional combat steps means more mana, it means more damage, and your goal with this deck is trying to kill your opponent as fast as possible. I will say commander damage is super viable. It only takes 3 hits to kill someone, and in the case of bulk up, you only have to hit them once. So there's a lot of viability here when it comes to just outright killing opponents. Even on Draconic Destiny, this kind of does 2 things in the deck. It's an enchantment that costs 1 generic, 2 red, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1 and has flying, haste, and pay 1. This creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. It's a dragon in addition to its other types. And then when enchanted creature dies, return Draconic Destiny to its owner's hand. The reason this does kind of 2 things in the deck is because you can buff up your power matters creatures that you're trying to sacrifice before you sacrifice them, and then when you sacrifice them, they're just going to return Draconic Destiny back to your hand, and you can cast it on another creature to do some messed up stuff with again. We're on cards like Greven, right? Greven's a 5 CMC creature with menace that says Greven Praetor Captain gets +X/+0, where X is the amount of life you lost this turn, and then whenever Greven attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, you draw cards equal to that creature's power, and you lose life equal to that creature's toughness. So if you're sacrificing a 6/6, you're drawing 6 cards, you're losing 6 life, and this guy's going to get +6 until end of turn. So you can kind of see where whenever we add Draconic Destiny into the mix, we can buff up that creature, sacrifice it, get more cards, get more damage, and we're going to lose a little bit more life, but there is a little bit of a lifelink strategy in this deck as well to kind of offset that. And remember, when your commander's hitting like a truck for 7 mana, lifelink is just going to be good. The Power Matter strategy is going to include a ton of cards that have very low CMC but very high power. So this new card, Zulufit, I don't know if I said that right at all, it's a 3 CMC legendary creature that says return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It's a skeleton in addition to its other types and has no abilities. It's amazing because now we get to reanimate a 3 CMC 8/8 just to sacrifice it again to draw 8 cards. This is going to be amazing in those Power Matter strategies. There's also just a ton of other very fun things you can do in this deck. Captivating Crew is a 4 CMC creature human pirate that says we can pay for to gain control of target creature and opponent controls until end of turn. Untap it, that creature gains haste until end of turn. Activate this only as a sorcery. That's very good with this kind of sacrifice style deck because we can use the 4 firebending mana to activate Captivating Crew, steal our opponent's big creatures, attack them with them, and then when we're done with them, sacrifice them for value. And that's just going to be an entire value engine in itself that's going to not only give us a ton of value, but take away our opponent's creatures. Another card I did want to showcase is Rakdos the Muscle. This is probably one of the best ways to utilize your mana in this deck. It's going to be a 5 CMC creature. He has Flying Trample, and whenever you sacrifice another creature, exile cards equal to its mana value from the top of target player's library until your next turn. You may play those cards and you may spend mana of any type to cast those spells. This is very strong. I know I said I'm on a ton of cards that have low CMC but high power, but the fact that even if you just sacrifice a 3/3 and then you get to exile the top 3 cards of your opponent's library and now you can cast those, and let's be honest, you were going to sacrifice the 3/3 anyway to draw 8 cards because that 3 CMC card is an 8/8. There's just a lot of value to be had here, and when you're doing it all, the deck is just synergizing, doing the thing, you're getting a ton of value and you're hitting your opponents like the truck, and that's kind of the core of this deck. Power matters, Ozai's big, utilize that. That being said, guys, that's going to be the end of the video. I'll leave a list to all of the precons in the description down below, and like I said at the beginning, I did put a lot more effort into this, building 4 decks and doing one video instead of splitting this up into 4 other ones. So if you would like, comment, subscribe, share this, I would really, really appreciate it. With that being said, hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.